Hello. I'm really glad you're here tonight. This hour is different from the rest of the day. It doesn't ask you to decide anything. It doesn't ask you to perform or explain or keep pace with a world that never seems to slow down. It simply invites you to lie still, to let your breathing deepen, and to allow your thoughts to move at whatever speed they choose. And tonight, your thoughts are going to travel very far. Further than you might expect. Further than the town where you live. Further than the country you were born in. Further than anything the modern world can offer. Tonight, your thoughts are going to carry you across centuries, across deserts and mountains and wide open grasslands that stretch to the very edge of the sky. Tonight, your mind is going to rest in one of the most forgotten, most beautiful, and most mysterious civilizations that ever shaped the human story. A civilization most people have never heard of. A civilization that lived, loved, built, wandered, conquered, and quietly disappeared into the long silence of history. Tonight, you are going to travel to the world of the Khitai, to the grasslands where they rode, to the oases where they rested, to the golden, dusty, windswept empire known as Qara Khitai. And you are going to rest there with them, in the quiet, in the ancient dark, in the deep stillness that only the desert and the steppe have ever truly understood. Before we begin, if this kind of gentle, unhurried journey through history and reflection speaks to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And down in the comments, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. There is something quietly extraordinary about knowing that people are listening to this from different corners of the world, different time zones, different climates, different lives. And yet all of us right now are lying in the dark together, letting our minds travel somewhere ancient and still. So settle in, adjust your pillows, pull your blankets up around you, find the position that your body has been waiting for all day, and know that for the next hour, you are not alone. You have history as your companion. You have the wind of the Central Asian steppe as your lullaby. You have the soft glow of Oasis firelight as your nightlight. Let's begin. You are lying in the dark right now, and somewhere above you, beyond the ceiling, beyond the roof, beyond the atmosphere of this modern world, the stars are out. They are always out. That is one of the true constants of existence. The stars were there the night you were born. They were there the night your parents were born. They were there 1,000 years ago when a Kitan horseman paused on the edge of a vast grassland, looked up at the same sky you are resting beneath right now, and felt something that you would recognize immediately if you could reach across the centuries and touch it. He felt smallness. He felt wonder. He felt the particular peace that comes from understanding that you are part of something enormous and ancient and continuing. You feel that too, right now, under your blankets, in the dark. You and that horseman, separated by 1,000 years and a half a world, sharing the same night sky. The Kitan people were nomadic. You need to understand this first, because it shapes everything. They were not people of walls and rooftops. They were people of movement, people of grass and wind and open sky. Their homeland was the vast steppe land of what is now northeastern China and southern Mongolia. A landscape that has no easy parallel in the modern world unless you have stood in the middle of it and felt the silence press against your ears like something physical. The grassland there goes on and on. It goes on past the point where you think it must stop, past the point where you expect a mountain or a sea or some other interruption. It simply continues. Green in summer, gold in autumn, white and aching, and still in winter. And the sky above it is enormous. A sky so wide and so blue during the day that it almost feels aggressive, as if the sky is trying to make a point. And at night, that same sky fills with stars so dense and so bright that the ancient Kitan people could navigate by them, read time by them, and find in them something that functioned very much like what we would call prayer. You can picture it now. Let your mind go there. Let your body sink deeper into your mattress as your imagination lifts you up and carries you back. You are standing on the steppe. The grass comes up to your knees and it moves in long, slow waves when the wind passes through it. The air smells like earth and cold and something faintly sweet that you cannot quite name. The horizon is very far away. The sky is very wide, and you understand, standing here, why the Kitan people were the way they were, why they moved constantly, why they followed the seasons and the pastures and the migrations of the animals they depended on. This landscape did not teach stillness. It taught movement. It taught adaptability. It taught you to read the weather in the color of the clouds and the behavior of the horses and the direction of the birds. The steppe was a school that never closed, and the Kitan people were among its finest students. They appear in written history around the 4th and 5th centuries, these Kitan people. Though they were alive and moving and building their culture long before anyone thought to write about them. They were Mongolic in origin, part of a great family of peoples that spread across Central Asia and the Far East, connected by language and by the particular kind of life that the steppe demanded. They were horsemen before they were anything else. They were riders. And on the steppe, being a rider meant being free in a way that settled people rarely understood. Your horse was your transportation, your companion, your status symbol, your weapon, and in some philosophical sense, your identity. The Kitan bond with horses was not merely practical. It was emotional. It was spiritual. The horse was the animal that made the steppe crossable, that made the world navigable, that turned the terrifying openness of the grassland into something you could inhabit and call home. You think about home now, not the home of walls and furniture and familiar smells, though that home matters deeply and you feel its comfort around you right now. You think about a more abstract kind of home, the kind that is carried within you, rather than built around you. The Kitan people had this kind of home, a portable home, a home made of habits and songs and stories, and the particular way they organized their felt tents, their gears against the wind. No matter where the season took them, they knew how to create this home, how to make it familiar, how to make it safe in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by grass and sky and the distant sound of horses moving in the night. By the 10th century, the Kitan had grown from a nomadic confederation into something much larger, something that surprised even themselves, perhaps. Under the leadership of a remarkable man named Abaoji, who became known by the posthumous title Emperor Teizu of Liao, the Kitan transformed. They built cities. They created a writing system. They established a state. They conquered vast territories. And in 907, the same year that the great Tang dynasty of China finally collapsed after nearly 3 centuries of power, Abaoji unified the Kitan tribes and became their first emperor. The timing of this was not coincidence. The collapse of the Tang dynasty left a vacuum of power in East Asia, and the Kitan moved into that vacuum with the confidence of people who had been waiting for the world to make room for them. Let your body relax a little more. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. You've been holding tension in places you weren't even aware of. Let it go now. We're in no hurry. The Kitan waited centuries for their moment. We can take our time with their story. The Liao dynasty. That is what the Kitan state was called. Liao. A name that echoes quietly if you say it aloud in the dark. Liao. It controlled an enormous territory. At its height, it stretched from the Pacific coast of what is now northeastern China all the way west into the heart of Central Asia. It bordered the Song dynasty of China to the south, and the two great powers maintained a complicated, wary relationship that included both military confrontation and extended periods of peace, maintained by tribute and diplomacy. The Liao court was sophisticated, cosmopolitan in a way that might surprise you if you still picture the Kitan only as horsemen on the open steppe. They adopted elements of Chinese court culture while maintaining their own traditions. They held ceremonies in the Chinese manner and ceremonies in the Kitan manner. Their emperors received ambassadors from across the known world. Their cities had markets where goods from China, from Persia, from the Byzantine Empire, and from the nomadic world all came together in a single, extraordinary marketplace of things and ideas. You have probably, without knowing it, been shaped by the Kitan. The English word Cathay, which became a poetic name for China in European literature, and which you may have encountered in poetry or old maps, comes directly from Khitai. The word spread westward along the Silk Road. Arab and Persian traders who encountered the Kitan or heard of them named the eastern lands Khitai, and that name traveled further west until Marco Polo used it, and until it entered the imaginations of European explorers who dreamed of reaching Cathay by sea. When Christopher Columbus sailed west in 1492, he was partly looking for Cathay. He was, without knowing it, looking for the land of the Kitan. The word you use even now, even in this modern world, even in this night, carries 1,000 years of history in its syllables. The oases now. Let your mind travel there, because the oases are where the story becomes most beautiful, most intimate, most human. Central Asia, in the era of the Kitan and later the Qara Khitai, was crossed by the great network of routes that historians would later call the Silk Road. This was not one road. It was never one road. It was a web of paths, tracks, caravan routes, mountain passes, and river crossings that connected China to Persia, to the Arab world, to Constantinople, to Rome. And along this web, scattered like jewels dropped by a careless hand, were the oases. Cities built around water, in the middle of impossibility. Towns that existed because a spring emerged from the ground, because a river descended from a mountain, because somewhere in the vast dryness, water had found a way through. Imagine the desert, the real desert, not the romantic desert of film and story, though that is beautiful too. The real desert of Central Asia, which is called the Taklamakan. The word Taklamakan in the Uyghur language means roughly, you go in and you don't come out. That is the desert the oasis cities live beside. That is the immensity of dryness that surrounded these small miracles of green and water and human life. You understand immediately, when you picture it, why the oases were everything. Why a caravan emerging from the desert to see palm trees and running water and the smoke of cooking fires would have felt something close to religious ecstasy. Why travelers who had been walking through nothing for weeks would weep when the first green appeared on the horizon. You have known your own oases, perhaps not of the desert kind, but you have known the moments in your life when relief arrived precisely when you had almost stopped hoping for it, when something cool and sustaining appeared after a long stretch of difficulty. You remember those moments. Under your covers, in the quiet of this night, you can feel the echo of them, the particular quality of relief when what you needed finally arrived. The Silk Road traveler walking toward the palms felt something like that, only larger, only more desperate, only more grateful than most modern life allows us to be for the simple miracle of water. The oasis cities had names that still ring with strangeness and beauty if you say them slowly. Kashgar, Samarkand, Bukhara, Merv, Dunhuang, Kitan. These were not small stops on a long road. These were great cities, cities of learning and trade and art and architecture, cities where scholars translated texts from Greek into Arabic, from Chinese into Persian, from Sanskrit into everything. Cities where a merchant from Venice might sit in a market beside a merchant from Tang Dynasty China, and a nomad from the steppe, and a monk from Tibet, and all of them were buying and selling and exchanging not just goods, but ideas, stories, technologies, and dreams. You are drifting now, a little. You can feel it. The weight of the blankets is settling more comfortably. Your breathing has slowed without you trying to slow it. Let it slow further. Let your body become heavier. Let the ancient world carry you. The oases were also places of extraordinary religious diversity. Buddhism traveled the Silk Road from India into Central Asia and then into China, carried by monks who walked or rode through the oasis cities, stopping to pray and teach and copy texts. Islam arrived later and spread through the same routes. Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest religions, was practiced in the Persian-speaking world, and its temples and fire altars stood in several oasis cities. Nestorian Christianity, a branch of the faith that had spread eastward from Persia, had communities in Central Asia, and even in China. Manichaeism, a complex religion that blended elements of many faiths, found converts among the nomadic peoples of the steppe. In the Oasis bazaars, you might hear prayers in 4 different languages before noon. You might see a Buddhist monk, a Muslim scholar, a Zoroastrian priest, and a Nestorian deacon all buying food from the same market stall. The oasis cities were not just places of trade. They were places of encounter, of collision, of the creative, sometimes violent, always fascinating process by which human beings make sense of each other across the boundaries of difference. The Kitan of the Liao dynasty engaged with this world. They controlled trade routes. They collected taxes from the caravans that passed through their territory. They encountered all of this religious diversity and responded with what was, by the standards of the medieval world, a remarkable degree of tolerance. The Liao court contained Buddhist monasteries and temples. The Kitan nobility patronized Buddhist art. Enormous stone pagodas were built during the Liao period, some of which still stand today in northeastern China, slightly tilted by centuries of time, but still standing, still pointing at the sky, still carrying the prayers of people who lived 1,000 years ago and who believed that something was listening. You think about what you believe now, not with pressure, not with any demand that you reach a conclusion, simply with the gentle curiosity of a mind that has lived long enough to know that certainty is rarer and less necessary than younger people think. The Kitan believed many things across their centuries of existence. They believed in a sky god. They believed in the power of ancestors. They came to believe, many of them, in the Buddha. They believed in the power of ritual and ceremony to hold a community together, to mark the passages of life, to make the incomprehensible slightly more bearable. They were not so different from you in this. They were trying to make sense of being alive, trying to find meaning in a world that did not always offer it freely, trying to hold together the people they loved in the face of everything that tried to pull them apart. The Liao dynasty lasted for over 200 years. 200 years is a long time, long enough for many generations to be born and grow old and die within its borders, long enough for the Kitan people to shift and change and become something more complex than they had been at the beginning. And then, in the early 12th century, a new power rose from the east. The Jurchen people, who lived in what is now Manchuria, rebelled against Liao rule and, with astonishing speed, dismantled the Liao state. The Jurchen established their own dynasty, the Jin, and the Kitan found themselves for the first time in centuries without an empire. But they did not disappear. A Kitan prince named Yeludashi gathered survivors. He gathered soldiers and families and knowledge and memory, and he led them west into the heart of Central Asia, into the world of the Oases, away from the land they had ruled for 200 years, into the unknown. This westward journey, this extraordinary, painful, defiant march across the steppe and the desert, led to the creation of something new, something that would last another century and would leave its own mark on the world before the end finally came. The Kitan, who went west, became the Qara Khitai. Qara, in the Turkic language means black. Not black in any negative sense, but black in the sense of great, of powerful, of the West, where the black of night first deepens. Qara Khitai, the great Khitai, the Western Khitai, the Khitai of the darkness and the stars. And you, lying here in your own darkness, in your own stillness, have something in common with that name tonight. Let your eyes grow heavier. Let the darkness behind your eyelids become the darkness of the Central Asian night. Let the wind you might hear outside your window become the wind of the steppe. Let your body rest in the way that travelers rest after a very long journey, because that is what tonight is. A very long journey through time, and you have arrived here, in the oasis of this bed, in the sanctuary of this quiet room, and you can rest now. The Qara Khitai established their new state in the region that historians call Transoxiana, and what is today Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and parts of Kazakhstan and Xinjiang. This was the very heart of the Silk Road world. This was the landscape of the great oases. Yelu Dashi, who became the Gurkhan, the supreme ruler of the Qara Khitai, was a man of remarkable intelligence and strategic vision. He had been educated in the Chinese classical tradition at the Liao court. He spoke Chinese, Kitan, and probably several other languages. He understood statecraft and diplomacy and the complex art of ruling over people who were not like you. And now he needed all of that understanding, because the world he had entered was vastly more diverse than anything the Kitan had ruled before. The population of the Qara Khitai state was mostly Turkic and Persian-speaking, mostly Muslim, and had been ruled until recently by a collection of local dynasties that the Kitan newcomers had displaced or absorbed. Yelu Dashi was pragmatic. He did not try to convert his Muslim subjects to Buddhism. He did not try to impose Kitan culture on a people who had their own ancient and sophisticated culture. He taxed them. Yes, he required loyalty and tribute, but he allowed them to practice their religion, speak their language, maintain their customs, and run many of their own local affairs. This policy of tolerance was not merely noble, it was intelligent. It was the policy of someone who understood that you cannot rule a diverse empire by force alone. You must allow people to remain themselves within the larger structure of your authority. This was, and remains, a difficult lesson, one that empires have repeatedly failed to learn. The oasis cities of the Qara Khitai realm continue to function. Caravans continue to move. Merchants continue to buy and sell. Scholars continue to write and translate and debate. The great madrasas, the Islamic schools of learning, continue to operate in Samarkand and Bukhara. Buddhist monks continued their prayers in the eastern parts of the territory. Life in the oases went on, as life in the oases had always gone on, adapting to whoever held power at the moment and continuing to do what oasis cities have always done: survive, connect, breathe at the crossroads of the world. You breathe now, slowly, fully. Let your lungs fill completely, and then let the breath go all the way out, further than you think it needs to go, until your chest is empty and still. Then let the next breath come on its own, in its own time. You don't need to control it. It knows what to do. Your body has been breathing since the first moment of your life, and it has not forgotten how. Trust it. The way the oasis trusted the spring. The spring kept coming up from the ground year after year, century after century, regardless of who was in power, regardless of which dynasty rose or fell on the steppe. The water simply came, and the city grew around it, and the caravans stopped there, and the scholars wrote there, and children were born there and grew old there and died there and were buried there, and their descendants watered the same gardens from the same spring that had been there since before anyone could remember. This is where we rest tonight, here in the oasis, here in the ancient quiet, here where the water runs clear and the palms shade the late afternoon, and the sound of the city is distant enough to be beautiful rather than intrusive. You are safe here. You have arrived. The journey across the desert is done. The sand is no longer in your shoes. The sun is no longer on your neck. You are in the cool shade of something that has lasted, something that was here before you and will be here after. And for tonight, it is yours. Close your eyes a little more. Let the ancient world hold you. You are still here, and that matters more than you know. The night has deepened around you since we last traveled together through the ancient world of the Kitan people, through the grasslands and the lost dynasties and the wide open sky of the Central Asian steppe. And now the oasis is waiting for you again. The same spring is still running. The same palms are swaying in the same evening breeze. The same stars that watched over the caravans of 1,000 years ago are watching over you tonight. You don't have to go anywhere to reach them. You simply have to close your eyes a little more and let the darkness carry you back. Your body is already resting. Your breath is already slow. Let your mind follow where your body has already gone. Into the quiet, into the ancient, into the extraordinary, forgotten world of the Qara Khitai and the oases that sustain them. The oasis at night was a different world than the oasis at midday. You understand this instinctively, the way you understand that rooms feel different in darkness than in light, that the same house you move through confidently during the day becomes something more mysterious and layered when the sun goes down. The oasis at night was a place of fire and shadow, of low voices and the smell of cooking spices drifting through the cooler air, of animals settling into rest after a day of walking through the merciless heat of the desert, of merchants unwrapping their trade goods and examining them by torchlight, checking for damage, counting inventory, making the quiet calculations that all of commerce requires, of pilgrims spreading their prayer rugs in the open air and bowing toward the direction they believed held the sacred, of children running between the fires until their mothers called them in, of old men sitting in circles and talking about things that old men have always talked about when the day's work is done and the night gives them permission to reflect. Things like time, things like distance, things like what they once expected from their lives and what their lives actually delivered. You have had conversations like that. Perhaps not around an oasis fire in Central Asia 1,000 years ago, but conversations of the same quality, the ones that only happen late, the ones that require darkness and a certain tiredness, and the permission that comes from knowing that tomorrow's demands haven't arrived yet. You remember specific conversations like that, the faces lit by candlelight, or firelight, or the soft glow of a lamp, the particular feeling of being truly seen by someone who had time to look. Those conversations changed you. They deposited something in you that ordinary daytime conversation rarely does. A sediment of understanding, a layer of knowing that settled quietly to the bottom of who you are and has been part of your foundation ever since. The caravan travelers who rested in the oasis cities of the Qara Khitai world had conversations like that every night. And they had something else too. They had stories. The Silk Road was a river of stories, as much as it was a river of silk and spices and glass and gold. Every traveler who arrived at an oasis brought news from where they had come from. News about wars and harvests and the deaths of rulers and the rise of new ones. News about strange animals seen in distant jungles and strange peoples encountered at the edges of the known world. News about markets where certain goods fetched extraordinary prices, or where a particular merchant had made his fortune or lost everything. These stories circulated through the oases the way water circulated through the irrigation channels, feeding everything they touched, making growth possible in places where growth seemed improbable. The Qara Khitai rulers understood the power of the oases as hubs of information. Yeludashi, the Gurkhan who founded the Western Kitan state, was a man who had survived catastrophe through intelligence. He had watched his dynasty collapse. He had led his people across thousands of miles of hostile territory. He had established a new state in a land where most people had never heard of the Kitan. And he had done all of this because he paid attention, because he listened to the stories that travelers brought, because he understood that knowledge in the medieval world was power just as surely as an army was power, perhaps more so because armies were expensive and knowledge, if you positioned yourself correctly along the routes where it flowed, cost you almost nothing at all. You have positioned yourself along routes of knowledge in your own life, perhaps not consciously, perhaps you did not think of it in those terms, but you chose who to listen to. You chose which conversations to pursue and which to let go. You chose what to read and what to set aside. You built, over the course of your life, a particular relationship with understanding. And tonight, in the quiet, you can feel the weight of everything you have learned. It is not a heavy weight. It is more like the weight of the blankets around you right now. A comforting weight. A weight that says something real is here. Something accumulated. Something that matters. Let your body sink a little deeper. Let the mattress receive more of your weight. You don't need to hold yourself up. You are allowed to be entirely held tonight. The oasis city of Kashgar was one of the most important in the Qara Khitai world. It sits at the western edge of the Taklamakan Desert, at the point where the two great branches of the Silk Road, the northern route and the southern route around the desert, came back together like two rivers meeting after a long separation. Kashgar was therefore a place where everything converged. where the roots of the world knotted together for a moment before separating again. Merchants from the east arrived with silk and porcelain and tea. Merchants from the west arrived with glassware and horses and finished wool. Merchants from the south brought cotton and spices and precious stones from India. And from the steppe to the north came furs and amber and the felt goods that the nomadic peoples produced with extraordinary skill. In the bazaar of Kashgar, all of these things existed simultaneously. All of these worlds touched each other, and the air was thick with languages, with the calls of merchants, with the sounds of animals, with music played by street musicians who understood that travelers who had been walking through silence for weeks were desperate to hear a human voice doing something other than negotiating. You can hear it now, if you let yourself, faintly, under the quiet of your room, under the sound of whatever the night is doing outside your window. You can hear the distant hum of the ancient bazaar, the particular music of a world that has never entirely disappeared because trade and travel and the human need for exchange never disappear. They only change their form. The camel caravan became the container ship. The bazaar became the marketplace. The oasis became the airport, the service station, the border crossing where one world hands you to another. The essential structure persists. The human need that drove it persists. You are part of that same ancient structure, even now, even in this bed, even in this modern night. You are the inheritor of every traveler who ever stopped to rest at an oasis. You are the continuation of a very old story. The Qara Khitai state at its height controlled not just the oasis cities, but the mountain passes between them. This was crucial. The Silk Road did not only cross deserts, it also crossed mountains. The Pamirs, which ancient travelers called the roof of the world, rose to the west of Kashgar in walls of ice and rock that seemed designed to discourage crossing. And yet people crossed them. People have been crossing those mountains for thousands of years because the rewards on the other side were worth the difficulty of the passage. The Qara Khitai garrisons at the mountain passes collected tolls from the caravans that moved through. They provided a degree of security on routes that were otherwise vulnerable to bandits and raiders. They made the trade possible, or at least more possible, in exchange for a percentage of the wealth that flowed through their hands. This arrangement was not so different from the arrangements that have always governed commerce. Someone controls a choke point. Someone else needs to pass through it. A price is negotiated. The price is paid. The passage is made. The world continues to turn. The Qara Khitai understood this mechanism with the clarity of people who had been on both sides of it. They had been nomads who paid tribute to stronger powers. Now, they were the power that others paid. This reversal did not make them cruel. It made them, if anything, more thoughtful about how to manage the relationship between strength and the people in your care. Because a power that destroys the trade it controls is a power that destroys its own income. The oasis had to live and breathe and function for the toll to mean anything. The Qara Khitai needed Kashgar to be vibrant. They needed Samarkand to be rich. They needed the caravans to keep moving. Their own survival depended on the survival of the world they had come to rule. There is wisdom in this that goes beyond politics. The things that sustain you must themselves be sustained. The relationships that feed you must themselves be fed. The sources of warmth and meaning in your life need your attention and your care, not just your presence and your taking. You know this. You have learned it, probably the way most deep lessons are learned, through the experience of failing to apply it and then understanding afterward what the failure cost. The Qara Khitai rulers learned it too, some of them better than others, some in time to adjust, others too late. The night in the oasis deepened in the same way your night is deepening now, hour by hour, the fires burning lower, the voices becoming fewer, the animals still, the children asleep. One by one, the travelers found their places to lie down, their blankets or their cloaks pulled up against the desert cold, because the desert is cold at night. This surprises people who think of desert only as heat, but when the sun goes down over the Taklamakan, the temperature drops dramatically. The same sand that burned your feet at noon is cool and then cold and then almost shockingly cold by midnight. And the sky above is extraordinary. Clear the way only desert sky is clear, with no moisture in the air to diffuse the starlight. The stars are hard and bright and close, not the soft, distant stars of humid climates. These stars are sharp. They have edges. They look as though you could reach up and cut yourself on them. The travelers lay under those stars and felt the immensity of where they were going, of how far they had come. Some of them were frightened. Some were exhilarated. Most were simply tired in the way that honest physical effort makes a person tired. A tiredness that is clean and uncomplicated. A tiredness that asks only for sleep and not for the resolution of any problem. You know this kind of tiredness. Perhaps you felt some version of it today. The body's honest report of effort made and energy spent. And now the body asking, not urgently, not with pain, but with a kind of gentle insistence, to be allowed to rest, to be allowed to restore, to be allowed to do the quiet, invisible work of healing that sleep makes possible. Let that tiredness take you now. Don't resist it. You don't need to stay awake for the story. The story will be here when you wake. The oases will still be standing in whatever dreams find you. The Qara Khitai will still be riding across whatever step your sleeping mind creates. Let the sleep come if it wants to come. And if it doesn't come yet, simply rest here in the telling. Yelu Dashi died in 1143, having built something remarkable from the ruins of what he had lost. His wife, the Empress Dowager Xiao Tabuyan, ruled as regent after his death because the Kitan tradition allowed women to hold significant power. This was not common in the medieval world. In most of the great civilizations that surrounded the Qara Khitai state, the idea of a woman ruling in her own right, making military decisions and political calculations, and sitting at the center of state power would have been unthinkable. But the Kitan and their ancestors had different traditions. Steppe societies often granted women a status and an autonomy that settled. Agricultural civilizations rarely did. A woman who could ride, who could manage a household that moved with the seasons, who could make decisions when her husband was away on campaign, for months or years, was a woman who had to be competent. The steppe demanded competence regardless of gender. You think about the women in your own history, not just the famous ones, not just the ones history remembered and recorded, but the ones in your own life, the ones who held things together quietly while the world paid attention to other things, the ones who made decisions that shaped the paths of families and communities without ever being called leaders, the ones whose competence was so constant it became invisible. You know who they are. You carry them with you. Under these covers, in the quiet of this night, you can feel their presence, their contribution to who you are, the particular strength they model for you, whether you recognized it as strength at the time or not. The Empress Xiao Tabuyan ruled well. The state she governed was stable. The oases continued to function. The caravans continued to move. When her son was old enough to take power, she handed it to him without conflict, which was itself a kind of achievement in a world where transitions of power were frequently violent. The Qara Khitai continued under successive rulers, maintaining their territory, managing their diverse subjects, and watching the world around them change with the careful attention of people who had already survived one catastrophic change and had no desire to be surprised by another. But the world around the Qara Khitai was changing in ways that no amount of careful attention could have prepared them for. From the east, from the same grasslands where the Kitan had once ridden freely, a new force was rising. A force that would not merely conquer the Qara Khitai, but would conquer everything. A force that history would eventually call the Mongols. But that story, the story of the great Mongol tide, belongs to a later chapter of history. Tonight, you rest in the earlier time, in the time before the storm, in the relative peace of the oasis world that the Qara Khitai managed and protected and, in their way, loved. Because you can love a place you came to through loss. In fact, perhaps you love such places most deeply. The Qara Khitai had lost everything they had known. They had lost their homeland, their dynasty, their first empire. And they had walked west and found the oases. And the oases, with their palms and their water and their bazaars and their astonishing human variety, had become their world, had become what they protected, had become, in the deepest sense, home. The portable home that the Kitan had always carried within themselves had finally found a place to land. In the oasis cities of Central Asia, in the crossroads of the known world, in the place where every road led and every road began. You understand this too. You have built homes in places you didn't expect. You have arrived somewhere through difficulty and loss and found, to your surprise, that what was there was worth staying for. That the life you were given after the life you expected didn't happen was, in its own way, enough. Was, in certain lights, more than enough. This is not a small understanding. This is one of the largest ones that living a long life offers you. The grace that exists in what remains after what you wanted has gone. The oasis cities maintain their libraries. This is something that deserves your attention as you rest here in the dark. The libraries of Central Asia in the medieval period were among the finest in the world. Scholars in Samarkand and Bukhara and Merv translated and preserved texts from ancient Greece, from Persia, from India, from China. They did mathematics and astronomy and medicine. They mapped the stars and calculated the movements of the planets and developed algebraic methods that the rest of the world would not encounter for centuries. In the candlelit rooms of these oasis libraries, while the caravans rested outside and the desert waited on all sides, human knowledge grew, deepened, connected with itself across civilizations and languages in ways that the politicians and soldiers and merchants who made the Silk Road possible rarely understood or intended. Knowledge has always grown this way, in small rooms, in the margins of larger events, in the quiet hours when the world's attention is elsewhere. The scholars in the Oasis libraries were not famous in their lifetimes, the way generals and emperors were famous. They did not command armies or control trade routes. They sat at their desks and they thought carefully about difficult things, and they wrote down what they found. And what they found became the foundation of what came after, became the knowledge that eventually reached Europe and contributed to the Renaissance, and then the scientific revolution, and then the modern world that produced the bed you are lying in, and the blanket covering you, and the technology carrying my voice to you through the darkness. You are the inheritor of those scholars too, as much as you are the inheritor of the merchants and the horsemen and the rulers. The quiet ones made you possible, the careful ones, the ones who sat in the candlelight and thought. The sound of the oasis at 3 a.m. was close to silence. Not perfect silence, because the desert is never perfectly silent, and neither is a city, even a sleeping one, but a silence so deep and so textured that it had almost a physical quality. The sound of the spring running through the irrigation channels, the occasional soft movement of a tethered animal, the wind, always the wind, moving through the palms with a sound that has no good comparison in the modern world, a sound that is both ancient and completely present, a sound that makes you feel, if you hear it alone at 3 a.m. in an oasis at the edge of the world's most forbidding desert, that you are exactly where you are supposed to be, that the world has arranged itself around you with a precision that feels almost intentional, that the spring and the palms and the stars and the wind knew you were coming and prepared this moment specifically for your arrival. You feel something like that right now, in this bed, in this room, in this particular night. There is a quality to the quiet around you that is not empty. It is full of the accumulated presence of your own life, full of the memories that surface when everything else is still, full of the understanding that comes only in these hours when the demands of the day have finally, completely let you go. This quiet is not absence, it is arrival. You have arrived at the part of the day that is entirely yours, that belongs to no one else, that asks nothing of you, that simply offers you rest and the freedom to be, without performance or explanation, exactly who you are. Let yourself be that now, completely, without reservation, without the part of you that is still monitoring how you're doing, or whether you're relaxing correctly, or whether sleep is coming on schedule. None of that matters. The oasis doesn't care about your schedule. The spring runs whether you are anxious or peaceful. The palms sway whether you are ready or not. Simply be here. Simply let this moment be enough. The Qara Khitai world lasted for nearly a century after its founding. 90 years of oasis life, of caravan taxis and Buddhist prayers, and Muslim scholars and Kitan horsemen adapting, generation by generation, to the landscape and the people they had made their own. The children born into the Qara Khitai state did not remember the original homeland their grandparents had fled. They knew the oases, they knew the mountains, they knew the smell of the Silk Road and the sound of the bazaar and the particular quality of light that the Central Asian afternoon produces, golden and slightly hazy and full of dust that catches the sun and turns ordinary air into something luminous. This was their world, not the world their grandparents had mourned. Something new, something built from loss and determination and the human capacity to make beauty out of whatever material life provides. By the early 13th century, the world was changing again. A man named Kuchluk, a Naiman prince, who had himself been displaced by the rising Mongols, took control of the Qara Khitai state through intrigue and betrayal. Unlike the Gurkhan rulers before him, Kuchluk was not tolerant. He began persecuting his Muslim subjects, forcing conversions, closing mosques, imposing restrictions that the oasis populations had never experienced under Kitan rule. The result was resentment, deep, dangerous resentment. When the Mongol general Jibe arrived in 1218 to pursue Kuchluk, the oasis populations did not resist. They opened their gates. They had been waiting for relief from a ruler who had broken the ancient compact of tolerance that the oasis world depended on. Kuchluk was hunted down and killed. The Qara Khitai state was absorbed into the Mongol Empire, and the Kitan, as a distinct political entity, ceased to exist. They did not vanish as people. They continued to live and work and pray and trade in the oasis world they had helped to shape. They intermarried with the Turkic and Persian peoples around them. Their descendants are still there, in the DNA of the populations of Central Asia, if you know how to look. But as a dynasty, as an empire, as the civilization that had ridden west from catastrophe and built something extraordinary in the crossroads of the world, the Qara Khitai was gone. And yet nothing is entirely gone. You understand this. You have outlived things that felt permanent. You have watched structures that seemed immovable eventually move. You have said goodbyes to chapters of your life that felt like endings but turned out to be transitions. The Qara Khitai ended, yes, but the oases they had governed continued. The springs kept running, the palms kept swaying, the scholars kept writing in the libraries, the merchants kept laying out their goods in the bazaars, the caravans kept arriving and departing. The knowledge that had been built and preserved and transmitted through the oasis cities did not die with the dynasty that had protected it. It continued forward in time, the way all real knowledge does, moving through hands and minds and pages and eventually reaching a world that the original thinkers could never have imagined. Reaching, in its way, even you. The Kitan left something else behind. They left their name, Cathay, a word that meant, for centuries of European imagination, the mysterious, wealthy, cultured East, the place that Marco Polo wrote about with barely contained wonder, the destination that Columbus was trying to reach, the dream that motivated the great voyages of exploration that eventually connected the world's oceans and changed everything. The Kitan, who are barely known today, who are absent from most school curricula, who have no widely recognized cultural legacy in the way that Rome or Egypt or China do, gave their name to the dream that shaped the modern world's discovery of itself. Qara Khitai, the people of the grassland and the oasis, the riders who became rulers, who became memory, who became myth. You carry myths without always knowing it. The stories that shaped your imagination when you were young, the stories that gave you your first understanding of what was possible, what was beautiful, what was worth wanting. Those stories live in you. They are part of how you see the world. The Kitan story lived in the imagination of European explorers for centuries after the Kitan themselves were gone. It gave direction to ambition. It gave shape to longing. It transformed the indefinite desire for something more into a specific destination with a specific name. Qara, over there, to the east, where wealth and wonder live. Go find it. And people went, because of a name, because of a memory, because the echo of a civilization that had already ended was still strong enough, centuries later, to move people across oceans. Your own echoes are like this. The memories you carry, the lessons you absorbed from people who are gone, the values that were shaped in you by experiences that are long past. These are your Qara. These are the destinations that gave direction to your life, the things you moved toward because something in your formation told you they were worth moving toward. Love, knowledge, connection, craft, meaning, beauty, justice. Whatever your particular Qaras were, they came from somewhere. They were given to you by people and experiences and stories that are now part of the past, and they still move you. Even now, even in this bed, even in this quiet night, where nothing is required of you, the things that have always mattered to you still matter. The things that have always moved you still move you. That continuity is not a small thing. It is one of the most beautiful things there is. The oasis at dawn was as extraordinary as the oasis at midnight, but in a completely different way. Where midnight was mystery and stillness and the hard, bright stars, dawn was the gradual return of color to a world that had spent the night in gray and black. The palms caught the first light before anything else. The tops of them turned gold, while everything below was still dark. Then the gold descended, slowly, down the trunks and into the gardens and across the market stalls where merchants were already beginning to set up for the day. The spring caught the light and sent it running in small, shattered pieces along the irrigation channels. The dust in the air, always the dust in the oasis air, turned the early sunlight amber and rose. And the birds began. The birds of Central Asia in the morning, in the time before the caravans resumed their noise, and the bazaar found its voice, singing in the palms and the garden trees with a clarity and a complexity that would have stopped you in your tracks if you had been there to hear it. You have heard mornings like this, not this exact morning, not in this exact place, but the quality of them, the particular grace of early light in a quiet place, before the day begins its demands, when the world is still in the process of becoming. You have stood in the early morning somewhere, at some point in your life, and felt the day arriving around you like something being given, like a gift offered with both hands. You remember that feeling, even now, the freshness of it, the sense of possibility, the understanding that whatever yesterday was, today was new. The Oasis travelers who woke to that Central Asian dawn felt something very similar. They packed their goods, they watered their animals, they said their morning prayers in whatever direction and in whatever language their faith required. And then they walked back into the desert, back into the difficulty, back into the long, demanding, beautiful work of crossing the world. You have done this too. Every morning of your life, you have packed up whatever rest the night provided and walked back into your day, into your particular desert, into the demands and the joys and the difficulties and the extraordinary, ordinary complexity of being alive. You have done this thousands of times. You have risen when you were tired and gone forward when you were afraid and continued when continuation seemed hard. This is not a small achievement. This is the achievement that matters most. Not the visible victories, not the moments of triumph, but the 10,000 mornings when you got up and kept going. The 10,000 times you chose, without fanfare and without ceremony, to continue. The Qara Khitai did this too. They got up, generation after generation, and kept going. In the Oasis cities, at the crossroads of the world, under the wide sky of Central Asia, they built something from the ruins of what they had lost. They maintained it through tolerance and intelligence and the willingness to adapt. And when it ended, as all things end, the ending did not erase what had been, did not unmake the springs that had run, or the libraries that had been written, or the caravans that had passed through carrying their cargo of goods and stories and knowledge and dreams. Nothing real is ever truly erased. It becomes part of the foundation of what comes after. It becomes the underground water that feeds the next spring. It becomes the accumulated knowledge in the walls of the next library. It becomes the story that one traveler tells another by the fire at the next oasis. It becomes the echo that travels forward in time until it reaches the ears of someone lying in the dark 1,000 years later. Someone like you, someone resting under blankets in a world the Qara Khitai could not have imagined. And it says something simple. Something that does not require translation across centuries or languages or civilizations. It says, we were here, we tried, we built something worth building, we loved what we had, and even though it ended, even though everything ends, it mattered, it was real, and the world was different for our having been in it. You are the same, exactly the same. You were here. You tried. You built something worth building. You loved what you had. And whatever endings you have faced, whatever losses you have absorbed, whatever chapters have closed in the long book of your life, none of it was wasted. None of it was without meaning. The spring of you has run all these years, feeding things you may not even have seen. The knowledge of you has been transmitted to people who carry it forward without always knowing where it came from. The echo of you is already moving through time in ways you will never be able to track or measure. You don't need to track it. You don't need to measure it. You simply need to know in this quiet, in this dark, in this resting moment that it is real, that you are real, that your life in all its ordinary and extraordinary complexity has mattered and continues to matter and will matter long after this particular night has passed into morning. The oasis is quiet now. The last fire has burned to embers. The last voice has found its way to sleep. The palms are still in the windless hour before dawn. The spring runs on as it has always run, as it will continue to run, patient and constant and entirely unconcerned with the rise and fall of dynasties. The stars above the desert are still bright, but beginning to pale at the eastern edge of the sky, just slightly, just enough to suggest that dawn is somewhere in the future, coming steadily in the way that all good things come, unhurried, certain, unable to be rushed, but impossible to prevent. You are safe here. You are held. The 1,000 years of oasis life that we have traveled through tonight have brought you here, to this moment, to this rest, to this dark room where everything is exactly as it should be. The Kitan rode their horses across the steppe. The Qara Khitai built their state from loss. The scholars wrote their books by candlelight. The merchants laid out their silk. The spring ran through the desert. The palms swayed in the evening wind. And all of it, every moment of it, every life lived and every mile crossed, and every text translated and every prayer said over 1,000 years in the oasis cities at the crossroads of the ancient world was part of the long, continuing, extraordinary story of human beings doing what human beings have always done. Trying, building, loving, losing, going on. That story includes you. It has always included you. And tonight, it is holding you, gently, without demands. The way the oasis held the travelers who arrived exhausted and were given water and shade, and the company of others, and the gift of rest before the next leg of the journey. Rest now. The next leg can wait. The morning will come when the morning comes, and you will meet it as you have always met it, ready, but not yet. For now, just this, just the dark, just the quiet, just the ancient, patient, persisting world holding you while you sleep. The fires die down, the stories settle, and the world grows still. Let your thoughts drift away like embers on the wind. Good night. You've journeyed far through time tonight. Now it's time to journey into dreams. Close your eyes, breathe, and let sleep find you.